Hello and welcome to episode 141 of the Ego Chall Podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, we're talking New Year's resolutions. We're almost to the end of 2024. This is actually the final Ego Chall Podcast episode of 2024. So we'll talk about some New Year's resolutions for each of the 12 Call of Duty League teams. We also have some different news that basically after we recorded our last podcast, some news dropped, and that's kind of the Ego Chow tradition as we know it. And we'll talk about some other stuff possibly depending on the time. But before we get to any of that, how are you doing, Big?
I'm all right. Had a pretty hectic day, but that's all in the past now. And yeah, like you said, final show of 2024, especially recently. It's been exciting end of the year for us, and looking forward to not only this show, but what else we got cooking up for you guys in 2025. So I'm excited.
Yeah, Merry Christmas to everybody that celebrates. Obviously, we haven't been back here since a week ago or so, or maybe a little bit over a week now. So it's been a while, but we've kept up with the YouTube videos. That was a long, few hours that I put together all those videos to go from like our last podcast episode until today. And we weren't sure because of the stuff that Bink was happening with Bink. We weren't sure if we were going to do a podcast episode today, but here we are, and we're here to talk about some Call of Duty League stuff, some COD esports. First and foremost, this has happened like literally the day after we recorded our episode. Hacienda was added to the CDL map pool in all three modes. So Hacienda, Hardpoint, Search and Destroy, and Control being added in, I think effective immediately in the Call of Duty League. And Rewind has been removed from the Hardpoint and Search and Destroy map pools to make room for Hacienda. I saw a lot of chatter online about this. A lot of people saying Rewind being removed was not a good move, or that the pros didn't necessarily agree with it. I want to see what you think of that. What you think about kind of the online stuff. I never really know what to make of pros saying stuff like that online, whether they really mean it or if they're just kind of finding something to complain about. What do you think about Hacienda coming in?
Yeah, so I think on that note, in terms of like the player reception and reaction to it, Breaking Point tweeted that Rewind, Hardpoint, and S&D were removed due to being the most vetoed maps in the pool. CDL teams were not polled on the changes. So, you can look at that in two ways, really. And like, again, just for the sake of presenting both cases of the argument, in the CDL's eyes, they're probably like, oh, we don't have to, ask the teams what map they want replaced. We can just look at what map they aren't playing, and oh, it turns out Rewind, Hardpoint, and Rewind S&D are being vetoed the most, so they must not want to play it, and we're just going to replace it. So I can see that from the CDL's perspective, but at the same time, there could have been it's only 4 online matches for each team. I think it was 4 matches a day for 3 days and then 2 weeks, so that's 24 matches, so 24 sets of vetoes, I guess. And I don't know, it's still a small sample size no matter how you look at it, and it probably wouldn't have hurt for the CDL to try to reach out to some, even coaches or, veteran players or stuff like that, to get feedback, but there also just might not have been enough time for something like that. They wanted to get Hacienda in quick, even though there is a break going on now. So I don't know. There's a lot of ways to look at this, I feel like. And maybe later in the show, this will be something we can hash out again in terms of some of the things we want to see from the CDL as a organization moving forward into 2025. But nonetheless, of how this move was made, it seemed inevitable, right? Like once Hacienda was announced, it almost seemed inevitable it was going to be added in. Especially there were only 2 control maps in the initial map pool for the start of this year, so regardless of how it played, really, it felt like that was just going to be at least tested, unless it was just absolutely terrible and didn't work. Like it was probably going to find a way in. So yeah, the one thing to keep in mind, and I know I brought it up whenever we talked about Hacienda being revealed or leaked or whatever that was a couple episodes ago. Hacienda was a Black Ops 4 map and it was 5v5, and now we're in 4v4. So I haven't played it in ranked. I played it for the first time on Christmas Eve with Hype and some of the former ESN guys in Prop Hunt. So I didn't play it in a ranked setting or anything like that. I did see the window over on the one side of the map that Trem was talking about in one of the past episodes. So they did make some changes to the map from Black Ops 4, but yeah, I also at the same time, I haven't dove into ranked play at all yet. But from a pub experience, I definitely saw like people not liking Rewind, and I felt like it was one of the maps that it wasn't like, the worst map in the game. It wasn't my favorite map, but it wasn't the worst, and like I could tolerate playing it. So, I don't know. I guess, if the pros were vetoing it, there has to be some reason for it, that even if it was small sample size and just early on. And if that's all the CDL needed to pull the trigger on replacing it, maybe it'll work out in the long run. But Hacienda also has to be a good map in itself too, because we're still going to be running into some issues if Hacienda doesn't work out, and we're, let's just say teams are instantly vetoing it, even though it's added to the pool. Not going to change anything if you replace the Rewind veto with a Hacienda veto. It's just a different name. So we'll have to see how it all plays out, but definitely, I don't know. I feel like it, again, small sample size because it's only the first 2 weeks of online qualifiers, but I think it's pretty safe to say this might be the earliest a map pool change has been made into the season. There might have been some times where like the initial CDL rule set was announced and then like some maps were added or removed before play started, but I can't remember a map being added like before the first tournament or during the qualifiers of the first tournament. Maybe I'm very forgetful, but either way, it's exciting that the CDL is at least taking that initiative to get a map in there. We just got to hope it works out.
Yeah, I think it's for the CDL at least, it's a do if you're a do you're damned if you do, excuse me, and you're damned if you don't. Like there's just no way for them to win in this kind of situation. And I'm just talking about the Call of Duty League, not like in pretty much like the operations people. Like there's just no winning in this kind of situation for them, because they're coming in and they're thinking, okay, we're giving you a better map in theory. We're giving you a map that has already been in competitive Call of Duty before, a popular, at least somewhat popular map in a previous game. People know what it is. People seem to like it. And we're taking out a map that isn't played very much, isn't real well liked. And there was still a ton of complaining about it. So I'm not sure if that is, indicative of the CDL making a bad decision, or if Call of Duty pros were just kind of annoyed that they weren't given the input or given an option to kind of veto this this kind of situation. I just don't know. Like it seems like it's more. I agree with you that in theory the CDL players should have a say, and there should be some kind of feedback or some kind of communication between the operations crew and the players, so that these decisions can be made jointly instead of by one party and not the other. Like GAs are kind of the players' way of making decisions without the operations crew getting involved. And I think we're all in agreement that the GAs a lot of times go too far and make it worse for the viewers and make it worse for the league in general. And so you could say the same exact thing about the operations team coming in and making these decisions without consulting the players. I think we just have to wait and see. Like you said, like there's just no reason to at least from a fan's perspective or a viewer's perspective, there's no reason for me to get up in arms about this and say, oh my God, I can't believe you would take rewind out, even though like it's not being played very often. Like that's, at least in some game modes, like it's just not something that, like if you took out Vault, I think you could say, well, that's going to change a lot because this is the most played map. Like teams just love this map, or I don't even know if they love it, but like it is a map that is better than other maps. So I don't know. Like I just think the more maps that you have that are viable for competitive in general, that is a good thing. And I think if we could get to a point where we have even more than 5 maps in Search and Destroy, more than 5 maps in Hardpoint, more than 3 maps in Control, where you're going through multiple rounds of vetoes essentially to try to pick the map. I think that it works better than what we have now, where it's like we are just scraping the bare minimum, just trying to make sure that we have a minimum number of maps that we can kind of like just play a series with. So we'll see. I don't really know if it's going to work out or not, but I don't know. Like it seems like it's fine for the moment, at least. The only thing I'm not really a big fan of is just making this change at this point in time. And it's not like, well, it's too quick or whatever. Like, I just think when you are in these qualifiers and like the minor and stuff, I think like the first major should be like, okay, after the first major, we can make these changes. And that's kind of that's at least how I see it. Like, you have these 4 weeks of qualifiers, you have a minor, and then you have a major. And after that, it's like the second major set, second minor, the second major qualifiers, those will be completely different. Like, obviously, that's not how Call of Duty's ever worked because they drop updates like a week before a tournament, the week of a tournament, and players are like, well, we're just gonna have to play on the old patch and try to not update like our PCs and stuff. Like that kind of stuff happens all the time. But just from a personal point of view, like I just don't think that there should be that much change, and how much change it will be kind of determined or will be determined by the players. But I'm just in general against these kind of moves. But if you're looking at the opposite way, you could say, well, they listened to community feedback. They knew that they needed a different map or they needed one more map, and they got it. And we'll see how it plays out. I don't know if you had anything else on that before we move on.
I don't know if I get your point on waiting out the full initial cycle there, but I feel like it's just especially with the break, like it feels like a good time to make this change, especially when there were only 2 maps for Control and literally Vault Control is being played every single match except for 2, I believe. So I think that's the biggest thing. I guess maybe like a middle ground between my point of getting the map in there and yours of waiting it out. Like maybe they could have just added Hacienda Control and then waited out the major and all that stuff and added Hacienda Hardpoint and Search after that. But we don't have to live in that world of ifs, ands, and buts. But we know we're seeing Hacienda now, and I feel like unless it's just an unplayable map early on, like this is an opportunity the teams have to practice over this little break. I know teams players are spending it with spending the holidays with their families and whatnot, but the break gives you that opportunity to practice a new map like that. So it makes sense to me, but I get your point too at the same time.
Another thing that popped up, and I think this was even more interesting, was that Scump had said on one of OpTic's YouTube videos, he said that he was asked to play for OpTic, and he said this last Sunday, people deciphered it to be like a few weeks ago, like December 10th or so. So like right before Pred's news came out. So I think, obviously OpTic was probably blindsided in general, but it seemed from that like date kind of stuff that they weren't sure if Pred would be able to play the weekend, like the few days before it all came out and he went back to Australia. So I think that's pretty interesting in of itself. But what do you think about this idea that it was just floated to Scump, who obviously retired a few seasons ago, one of the best players of all time, but it's like, hey, would you be open to playing like at least one match for us in these qualifiers. What do you think of that?
Let me go to the CDL website here and view the roster. He's not even that. Karma is on the roster, and he's not. So that's the most interesting part about that is like he in well, it would have been MW2 when he actually retired. Like he definitely stayed on the roster after his retirement, and if they needed a sub, like he was fresh out of playing, and it would have been fine. This is a totally different circumstance where they technically would have had to add him to the roster unless he is actually a sub and it's just
Yeah,
not listed on the site. I don't know.
but didn't you say a
Um,
few weeks ago that what was it? Ben had said that they could
yeah,
file
yeah,
for like an
yeah.
emergency substitute.
I know, but that like to me when I first saw this, it was like it felt like you're asking Scump not because Scump is an OpTic content creator and one of the greatest Call of Duty players of all time. You're asking him because like he's on the roster. That's what it felt like to me, just because like something's going on with Pred. They got to do something quick to make a move. They don't have time to reach out to these amateurs and try and get a contract and all that yada yada. Scump's available. We throw him in, and obviously that doesn't seem like the case. So that's the most interesting tidbit to me. But can you imagine if that actually happened? Like, I feel like there are several times where COD Twitter has gone nuclear in recent years. If we didn't know anything about the Pred situation, and all of a sudden we just have Scump basically unannounced appearing in a CDL match and Pred on the like people would have been going nuts, I feel like. And I would have been texting you and we would have done an Ego Chall like almost immediately after that. That's just what's going through my head. It would have been I mean, I would have loved to see it happen. I don't remember if it was in this clip of him saying he was asked to play or if it was in another clip that I saw on Twitter, but he was kind of just referring to like, contemplating about returning to competing and that just the daily grind of watching VODs. I think it was in this clip. He mentioned like watching VOD for almost 2 hours before scrims with Rambo and then scrimming and then watching more VODs or playing eights and stuff like that. He was just that the daily grind of the competitive part, not the actual competing. He's like doesn't miss that. I don't want to misquote him or anything, but that was my interpretation of that. So, um, yeah, I mean, I guess it seems like we were closer to Scump potentially returning than we were before with him like that not even being a consideration, especially after last year, the team's coming off the world championship. Like we didn't expect OpTic to make a roster move in any capacity, let alone bringing back the King. So that would have been one for the record books, and I can only imagine what the viewership numbers would have looked like, and that would have been interesting too. Where would the viewers have gone? Would they have gone to the official stream, or would they have gone to uh, Zuma's co-stream, maybe Nade Shots, or maybe Methods just does Scump's co-stream with Scump playing? That would have been interesting tidbit to keep an eye on too. But uh, jokes aside, yeah, I mean this would have been just awesome, and obviously I think at the same there's been that talk over the last couple years since Scump retired about like doing a dynasty challengers team and or competing in challengers events and stuff like that. And I'm pretty sure I've always said when we've talked about that, it's like it's almost a lose-lose situation of him going to challengers. Like sure the one positive really is I guess two is that he gets to compete in an actual like tournament setting, even if it's just like an online challengers tournament or whatever. And the viewership on his stream would be absolutely insane. But it's a lose-lose in the sense of like how does it impact his legacy? How much do people care about him going into a challengers tournament and getting like top 16 and losing to four random amateurs just because they're amateurs that have been playing and scrimming the game together and he's playing event with people who don't play the game competitively and haven't scrimmed at all on this actual title. It'd be great content, and definitely you can sign me up for, on a petition to try and get it to happen, but I don't see it ever happening. I think this was potentially like a one stop, or just our one shot really to potentially get Scump back in an OpTic jersey and in a CDL match, and it seems like that it was just like a flicker basically, and now it's gone. So it's fun to talk about and fun to think about, but end of the day, I think Scump's got to be pretty happy with his career and how things are going right now on the stream.
Yeah, I would be a little more, I don't know, optimistic. Like, there's just no return in the fold for him. I think like you could see like Formal coming back. You can see other players that their careers kind of like petered out. Whoever it may be, but like they just didn't have like a good finish to their career. I mean, he literally was just like, I'm done. Like he announced his retirement before the season, got like 3 weeks in and was like, yeah, screw this. This is horrible. Like I can't do this anymore. And like that to me says like everything. It says, well, I can do it. It's just I don't want to. And maybe like a fill-in. I definitely could see him coming in maybe like a year down the line if OpTic has to, like, say Shotzi's sick or something and they don't have a fill-in. They're like, hey, Scump, would you just play one match this week? Like, you don't really have to do anything for it. You just have to like show up and play. I don't know if like that's something that would interest him, but I could see that more than like him actually putting in any time to practice. And like what you said is the preparation, and this is pretty much for all professional sports. Like a lot of athletes say that like it's not the games, it's the practices, it's the tape study. It's like just annoying, it's draining, it can burn you out, which if he doesn't have to do that, I think that would be nice. But challengers just seems kind of like a weird fit for him and a lot of those other older guys that there's just no reason for them to do it at this point in their careers.
Yeah, and I feel like I started saying it and I might not have actually finished this thought, but going back to like the roster and actually seeing Karma listed on that roster, he's in those scrims every day as the coach. Like it makes sense. He's at least like seeing the map and dissecting the map and going over stuff with those guys. So with him being on the roster in some sort of emergency situation, it makes a lot more sense for me if Karma was to be that emergency sub. Maybe he's, maybe Scump's playing the game more on stream. I know like the ranked play has been played with cheaters and stuff, so I don't even know if that's technically true or not. But either way, it's not like a skill thing or anything like that from a Scump versus Karma standpoint for an emergency sub. It's more of if Karma's on the roster, he's in the scrims, like talking to the guys and knowing what they're doing and stuff. It feels like a more natural emergency fit if Karma was to just fill in for something like that. But again, feels like this might be a one-time thing and we might not be talking about it anymore. But it's still, like I said, it was definitely fun to think and talk about.
Yeah, if he would have filled in, I guess it would have been for the C9 match, which was that Sunday, the first week of the CDL matches, and then OpTic like rolled. That was a very one-sided match. So it would have been very interesting. Obviously, C9 had all their internet issues in week one, and there would have been, I guess, some controversy. I don't know if like it's really considered a controversy, but just some kind of drama after that match. I also wonder like if they asked Scump just because they knew there were going to be a lot of questions about Pred not playing, and like it's a lot easier to like, hey, here's Scump, and like people aren't asking nearly as many questions, or like the volume of those questions aren't as loud if you have Scump playing his first match in a few years. I don't know if that was maybe the thinking, but it would have been a cool thing nonetheless. And I hope at least it happens one more time, like where we actually know that it's his final match or something along those lines, because you don't really get that with a lot of CDL players. Like we didn't necessarily know it with Clayster or Crim6 or Karma. Like a lot of these players just kind of like, even when we talked about Clayster, it was like, well, it might be his last match. We weren't entirely sure. And with Scump, it was really that, because we figured we had 5-6 more months of him playing Call of Duty, and he's like, yeah, I'm done. Like it's over. So maybe one more match, and then we can really kind of like say goodbye, like in a way. Even though I think most people are pretty content with how Scump's career went, in
Yeah.
general. But yeah, that would have been interesting. But it looks like OpTic might have a very good team nonetheless still, with Hook instead of Pred. And next we want to go over some of these New Year's resolutions. So, I texted Bink this like a few weeks ago when we were trying to think of maybe some holiday ideas. Obviously, there's like a big gap in the CDL action right now because we're on this holiday break and we have like basically a month from the end of like week 2 of the Major 1 qualifiers and the beginning of the first minor. So we had to kind of think about what we could possibly be talking about in this time. Obviously, we've done some power rankings. We've talked about some other things. Today, we want to go over these New Year's resolutions, and we're going to go through the teams and just. I wrote down a list. Bink wrote down a list. We could share both of them. We could share the best either way. But we want to basically say what these teams should be trying to strive for, or maybe like something they're essentially like trying to ask for, something that is missing from them, or something they can continue on into 2025. I think we should start at the very, very top, just Los Angeles Thieves in general. A team that we have, I think, the word glazed would probably be apt right now for how we have talked about LAT. But I think we had pretty much the exact same New Year's resolutions for them. Obviously, they are undefeated. I think we're in agreement that they're the best team at this point in time in the CDL. I literally put the same thing. Like I literally just said, quote, the same thing. That's what they should be striving for. That's what their New Year's resolution should be. What did you put as their New Year's resolution?
Yeah, I said continue to prove that you are the super team that everyone thought you would be. So, because it's one thing, we've seen it, and especially in, I mean, even in sports, like really when the big three first started in the NBA, like people trying to, or teams trying to imitate that and form their own super team, quote unquote, and then they don't win anything or anything like that. Like the super team moniker nickname has really been thrown around over the last 20 years, and there have been instances where it's on paper you got a super team, but then once they get into action, like it doesn't pan out. So um so far, again, small sample size, but so far so good for LAT, and that's where my head's at. And going into 2025, they just got to keep on proving that they are in fact that super team that everyone is expecting them to be.
Yeah, and it's going to come down, at least to me, to consistency. I think of Atlanta FaZe the last few years where they are just consistently a very strong team. They're a very tough out for any other team in the CDL. OpTic has been more up and down, and obviously the very highs are what they experienced last season, winning a world championship, but they had also lost, I think, 6 or 7 straight matches coming in to the world championship tournament. If LAT can find the consistency that Atlanta does, but still be, peaking just like OpTic did last year, and I think they definitely have the ability to do that. They're going to be nearly unstoppable, especially if OpTic has to try to get, through some of the kinks that they will obviously go through with Hook. I don't think anyone thinks that this is going to be like the perfect, like they just hit the ground running and they don't have any kind of issue. I don't think that can happen when you have to replace a player so suddenly, and a player as important as Pred as well. And obviously FaZe is just kind of off the rocker right now. Like they're not the FaZe that we're used to. So LAT has a little bit of a gap there where they could really extend that gap and extend that lead, and be even better. And that is a terrifying thing to think about.
And I think it all goes back to, I know I've said this a couple times on previous shows before, but the expectation in my eyes, and I feel like in the community eyes, is titles, plural, with an S, however you want to phrase it, multiple championships for this LAT team this year. Like that's the bar. They have to win more than one tournament. Like if I ask you right now, if LAT wins one major this year, doesn't win champs, is this season a success for them? And I
No.
think you would say no, and I think a lot of people would too. So that's how high the bar has been set, and that kind of that really goes with the super team moniker. Like they got to prove and live up to that.
And that's just the thing with all these super teams. Like if you ask the same question about OpTic, at least before the season, I don't know if that has changed since Hook's come in, but if you asked it about OpTic before the season, if you asked it about FaZe, obviously, I think everybody would be like, obviously, it's a disappointment if or a failure or whatever the word you want to use, but like obviously you didn't reach your potential if you didn't win the championship, and one team can win it, so there's going to be some
Yeah.
failures, going to be some missed opportunities for a lot of these teams.
I really don't think though that like even like I feel like for the teams OpTic and FaZe, like the bars sit at one championship. Like they have to win at least one tournament this year. And if they don't, it's a failure. With LAT, with really like everything we've heard about, the negotiations that went into this roster, I haven't heard any of the actual numbers or dollar figures thrown around, but it seems like it was a very large investment. Nade Shots mentioned taking a pay cut from his personal salary with 100 Thieves to make this happen. Like, it feels like that has to be factored in and like a part of why the bar is set a little bit higher for this team, even though those other teams, like, OpTic winning the World Championship last year and FaZe winning the World Cup. So I can see people arguing either way in terms of expectations for those teams, but I feel like the bar is just set a little bit higher with the LAT squad just because of everything that went into actually making it come to fruition.
Yeah, and I think it's also, we say you have to win a tournament, you have to win a championship, but if you go winless throughout the regular season, but then you win champs, like everybody's just like, all right, like that's
Right.
good enough. Like, and that's how we viewed champs in general for years, where these teams would, like Evil Geniuses obviously is a great example in World War II. They were like a complete dumpster fire at certain points, and they just went on a run at the end of the year and they win champs, and everyone's like, well, they won champs. Like that's what they had to do. And OpTic was kind of the opposite that season, where they started off well enough and then they started to just trend downward, and obviously they had their worst finish at champs, and the rest is history for Octane and Methods and their legacies with OpTic. But yeah, that's kind of the deal. Like if FaZe looks really bad for 5-6 months and then they find their groove at champs like OpTic did last season and they win it, then nobody can say it's a failure. Obviously, like you won a world championship, and that's really all that matters at the end of the day. I do want to stay with those teams, OpTic and FaZe. OpTic is a weird one, obviously, because we have this roster change and maybe a change in expectations. Obviously that is not a fan's point of view, but I think it is realistic to, like, with the roster that they had, they were undoubtedly one of the top 3 rosters in the CDL. And I had them at the top of my power rankings to start this season. You had them in the top 3 in your power rankings. There's nobody on planet Earth that realistically should have had them out of the top 3.
Yeah.
I think it's fair to say that, at least in terms of talent or in terms of star power, like it's been decreased with Pred departing, Hook coming in. And that's not a shot at Hook, but Pred was obviously a huge part to the success of that team and to them kind of dipping late in the regular season. Like he was pointed at as a problem during their losing streak, and that's because he's such a valuable player. What do you have as their New Year's resolution to OpTic? Because they're in a weird spot, but they looked pretty good with Hook in those first 2 matches.
Yeah, I think that's the key when you go through something like this is just more practice and playing time with Hook. We talked about it in multitude now and a couple episodes about how Hook has history playing with these guys on the OpTic squad before. So like and talking about his historical play style matching up pretty well with what we've seen out of Pred in his couple of years in the CDL. So really felt like a natural fit to me. But again, going back to like the super team talk, like we can say this stuff and you can, on paper it can look really well, but actually materializing that and having it come to fruition is a different story. So I'm looking right now on Twitch and Just in my followed channels, Hook is in the top 5 right now. It's got 587 people watching him stream right now, and that could be a bit of the OpTic effect, or could also just be a sign he's grinding. And I mean, that's what we really heard before this move, and everything I had seen on Twitter and heard in the community before that stuff was happening was just Hook was just absolutely frying in challengers, and he really was like, he's not like the most vocal on social media or anything like that. So like, if you are someone who is a fan of Hook for years and you're like, oh, I wonder how Hook's doing, I'm gonna go check his Twitter, and you're just like, oh, maybe he tweeted like he won a tournament or something once, and that was it. Like, you're not gonna know it just from checking his social media pages, but like hearing all that and seeing him being like that silent assassin, just putting his head down, putting in the time and grinding and having it show up and work out for him early on, and then have this opportunity with OpTic pop up from his perspective. I mean, that's like the golden opportunity. I mean, even there was the flank episode where they were doing the breaking point fantasy, and Enable drafted Hook in the last round when Hook wasn't even on a team. And he's like, yeah, maybe I'll take an L for the first like couple weeks, but he's gonna get picked up eventually. Nobody was expecting it to be an OpTic pickup, and it's really like, again, we talked about with Pred, like some of the teams that he can come back into whenever he makes his return to competing. I feel like if we did like, just if we talked about the challengers and we're like, yeah, Hook's like the top free agent pickup right now, like where can he realistically go? Obviously OpTic wouldn't have even been mentioned uh before all this Pred stuff happened, and we would have been naming teams that are like towards the bottom of the standings, whereas now he has this opportunity to join a team that's the defending world champions, join a team of players that he's won championships with before, a world championship before, and in the case of Shotzi. And yeah, that's just overall like what OpTic's got to look for in 2025 is just unlocking Hook the Nuke, really. And like, he hits that next level and gels with these guys, like this is still a really dangerous team. And you can make the argument, or at least debate, like once the tournaments are played and stuff, like which version of OpTic is better, this version with Hook or the previous version with Pred. I mean, different games and all that. It'd be a weird debate, but you can have it. I think at the end of the day, it's going to be, we always say the Greenwall's expectation is you ain't first, you last. So they're going to have to put in that work. And, it is fortunate. Again, hope Pred, handles his business and he's doing well. But the timing of this happening before the holiday break and whatnot was fortunate from an OpTic and Hook perspective. So they have this extra time to get some practice in ahead of like the minor in the first tournament. So we'll have to see if they're able to take advantage of that and, continue to play up to the standards that the Green Wall expects.
Yeah, I had something similar, like just finding consistency. Obviously, they were rather consistent last season for the most part until they hit the fourth major qualifiers. And then they started losing to teams that they just shouldn't be losing to. And that really wasn't the case until that point. They lost to Boston. That's their only loss so far this season. I'm not sure what to make of that, obviously, because Boston has gone to 4 Game 5s. They've won 3 of them. They've looked a lot better than last season. Still think the OpTic shouldn't be losing to them just in general, but if they're able to have that consistency in 2025, where if you lose to Toronto, you lose to LAT, you lose to FaZe, not every time, obviously that wouldn't be good, but if you lose, if you go 500 against those teams, like you're going to be at the very top of the standings. You're going to be in that top 3. Like it's not even going to be, a debate about like where you're going to be in the standings. You're going to have like a favorable matchup heading into champs. And one other thing was they need to further enable Shotzi to be the superstar that everybody like thought he was going to be. And like whatever Aches says is like, that's just Aches. But in general, like I think the criticism of him was like he wasn't at his top level for a few seasons. Obviously he was when he came into the CDL. He wins MVP, they win champs. No one can question how great he is. And then there was some time where it was like he's obviously kind of like deferring a little bit to his teammates, which is understandable. But they were at their best when he was at his best at champs last season. He was one of the top statistical players. He was a demon. I think that's pretty much like he wreaks havoc on the map, and that makes it very difficult, especially if you have someone like Dashy, who's like, a turret essentially. He can gun down anybody. Those two players in particular, with supporting players like Hook and Kenny, that's huge for them. And I think if OpTic is able to keep Shotzzy in that form where he is like one of the top players all throughout the season, Hook's importance is kind of decreased a little bit. Like, they're not going to have to rely on him to be as great as Pred was. Like, Pred was really great at champs, and that was part of their success. I don't think it's fair to necessarily ask Hook to entirely replace that. They need a lot of it just as like a top level team, but they wouldn't have to rely on him as heavily about Hook becoming like a superstar again. But if Shotzi's able to be the superstar and consistently do that, they might win champs again and be the first repeat champs.
And I will say, I mean, I hope I'm remembering the specifics here correctly, but for those who aren't necessarily very long time CDL fans, back in the inaugural season in MW 2019, Shotzi's making his CDL debut for the Dallas Empire. Hook is coming in as like, Hook the Nuke, like the young up and coming kid that everybody had already known about. Shotzi was the young up and coming kid that wasn't really a known quantity yet. We'd heard things, but he was a Halo world champion and just hadn't done much in COD outside of like playing wagers and stuff with Illy. But at the start for the Empire, if you remember, like things did not go well right away.
Yeah.
Like they got smoked in their first match against the Huntsman, where Formal and Scump are screaming across the stage at Crim 6. And the one thing that I'm saying in terms of specifics, if I remember correctly, they initially had Shotzi as like the smoke and trophy player on MW 2019. Again, this was 5v5 and they had limited or GA numbers of trophies and smokes you could use, but he was basically being like that guy in the hill, and that wasn't working out. He wasn't dropping those numbers initially, and they wanted Hook to be like that roaming guy, and then Hook was like, they basically like flopped roles, and Hook went to like the smoke trophy, and then Shotzi was just like roaming around, just killing people, popping dead silence, and doing his thing. And that kind of on that just small tweak to a composition of the team kind of unlocked and eventually led to the Empire winning a championship and the world championship that year. And obviously it's a different scenario now because both Shotzi and Hook are older players and different game, all that yada yada. But I think it is important just to highlight, like, they've already, not only have they worked well and won a championship together before, but they've had that pre-existing history where it's like, okay, something's not working for one of us, and maybe if we try and switch things up and do something else, like, it'll work out, and it did. So that should give Greenwall fans hope that, like, if anything does go wrong here early on for this team, like, they still have a ton of potential. And I think that's got to be scary for the rest of the league as well, as like, they're going to try and if I'm in one of the other teams in the CDL playing, it's not like I want to play OpTic now versus potentially in a couple months where they have more practice and everything. But again, who knows if the Pred situation and what rosters look like and all that yada yada. But yeah, end of the day, that's getting this roster more time together and getting the kinks out and get more practice and reps in should allow them to still be that dominant squad that most people expect.
One team that wasn't expected at all to be in the position that they are right now is the Carolina Royal Ravens, a team that we've talked about a lot, a team that I certainly did not have high expectations for, but are currently undefeated. They're at the top of the standings with LAT, with the Toronto Ultra. My New Year's resolution is about Litigoat. He is played incredible at this point. If Slasher can maintain this level of play, and that was my New Year's resolution, I literally wrote down Litigoat to stay as is, and that is that's essentially like their keys to victory at this point. I think we both are all in on the Gwyn hype train. Like we think he is a
Yeah.
great young player. We expected him to be great. But there were the question marks of like the rest of the team. The rest of the team wasn't. Well, I guess TJ was there, but the three other guys were like, okay, like what are they going to produce? What are they going to contribute to winning for Carolina, a team that has not historically been the most successful in doing so? And slashers come out and become like, I guess become again one of the top ARs in the CDL, which I think is surprising given the last few seasons with the CDL. He's been on, this is his third team in 3 seasons, or I think maybe in fourth team in 4 seasons. Like typically that does not mean that he's been doing very well, but he has been awesome so far, and he's been a huge reason why they've had this early success. So if he can continue that, then I think Carolina more or less can continue what they've done. What did you have for their New Year's resolution?
Yeah, I do think just on the Litigoat note, like it feels like without thinking too hard about it, like he's always been a pretty good Treyarch player of Treyarch games. So it really isn't too surprising to see him have this early success. And I even remember last year, like we were joking. I'm pretty sure it was Major One. Um, I think it was him and Ghosty. Like they both had like 1.4 KDs for the
Yeah, I think
first
so.
major, and it was because they literally played one series and lost, but they still dropped 1.4 somethings for the loss. And we're like, yeah, I mean, Slasher on land is scary. So like, if he's playing like this online and he gets to land and is still frying, like that's gotta, you're a Carolina fan. That's got to be what you're holding out hope for. That the they carry this momentum from these early matches into the land scenario. But what I said was a little similar to that, just a little vague, was just don't give anyone a reason to doubt your early success. I think, it's inevitable that they're going to lose a match. I do not foresee the Carolina Royal Ravens going undefeated in the 2025 CDL season
It's a
and
fair
just
bet.
running the table. Um, so like avoiding a string of losses here, especially like right after the holiday break, where it's like people can start doubting them and be like, oh, those first couple matches were a fluke, yada yada. Like doing whatever it takes to avoid that scenario and just keep pedal to the metal, foot on the gas, however you want to phrase it, and don't give anyone a reason to doubt you. Like again, I feel like it's inevitable they're going to lose. It's just avoiding a string of a lot of consecutive losses, having that impact team chemistry, all that stuff. Um, if they're able to, keep building off of these initial matches and initial success they've seen this year, then Carolina could be in a better position than a lot of people expected heading into this season. And like you said, a lot of question marks with, Slasher after his break, Vivid joining and potentially switching roles before. Now we've seen him play with an AR now, but like heading into the season, that was the question mark, was Vivid on an AR when we had historically seen him on a sub. And then even TJ, like you said, like TJ was playing with Gwen, but like, is that the right pairing for Gwen and bringing him back? Like, how's that going to work out? So, there were a lot of questions heading in, but Carolina has proved a lot of people wrong early on. Again, as I keep reiterating, it's a small sample size, so you can't take too much away from it, but you can't discredit what they've done so far. So, um, I think, yeah, even just in this few couple minutes here talking about like Slasher's performance on LAN historically, just as a player, like if he's playing this well online, I'm even more excited just than I was 5 minutes ago about him playing back on LAN again at Major One. And hopefully they're in a scenario where they remain in the winners bracket, so we get a couple series out of him on LAN, and good things could happen from Carolina from there. So that's where my head's at with this squad.
And so we'll move on through these New Year's resolutions. We'll try to pick up the pace a little bit, so we're not here until like 3 o'clock in the morning. But I think we should just finish out the top layer of the CDO at this point with the Toronto Ultra. I think really we're just looking for them to continue what they've already done. Because there's not a lot of bad that you can say about them. There's not many holes that you can poke in their game. What I would like to see in general is just Joe Deceives and Beans kind of continue to improve and continue to prove that they are like top tier players, because they haven't been at this point. Or, LAT was there for a little bit at the very end of last season, but I don't think either of us thought like, okay, like they're a world championship contender. So like if they're going to be that this season, the Toronto Ultra, they're going to need Joe and Beans to be like, like top quarter players, even if they are in a support role. What do you think about Toronto?
Yeah, I think I really didn't put too much thought into a resolution for Toronto just because I've hyped them up and a lot in the episode since we started playing. I've talked about like how excited I am to see more of this the Kleenex and Joe Deceives SMG duo and all that stuff about like Kleenex saying potentially he's got to slow down to match the pace of Joe Deceives or whatever. I said that wrong, but Kleenex altering his play style potentially to work better with Joe Deceives or whatnot. Like I'm unlocking um, a new version of Kleenex. Like there's been a lot to be excited about with Toronto, and again, the talking point that we've gone over now is like that they're off to a good start, and this is after losing an MVP caliber player in Scrap and former world champion in Envoy. And there would have been people who were like, if you're replacing them with anyone except for other world champions and MVP caliber players, like it's a downgrade. But so far, Beans and Joe Deceives have proved that's not necessarily the case. And again, it's early, but I'm excited with what we've seen from Toronto so far. I think the other thing, really, where my head's at overall with Toronto is if you've listened to the last couple episodes, kind of went back and forth a little bit on where I wanted to necessarily place Toronto in the power rankings, and especially their win over FaZe. Does that like push them ahead of FaZe in the power rankings, or is it just an early online match and things stay where they are in terms of the power rankings? But I think that's just the general message or New Year's resolution way I'm going to word it. Like if Toronto, I think consensus, even the guys on Toronto would say heading into this year that the consensus community top three was LAT, OpTic, and FaZe, and in no particular order. And if Toronto wants to enter that conversation and prove that they are a top three team, or prove that there needs to be a top four conversation, they got to prove that they belong. And so far it's looking good for them early, but they got to continue to build on that and show they belong basically.
Before we exit out of this conversation, I do want to acknowledge that we had some YouTube comments that I just didn't see until now. But the first comment was from Hawk John. He said, "Talent wise, Thieves got it. Who do y'all think are possible teams that can upset them? Like upsetting the Thieves is like literally any other team in the league right now beating them, I think. And granted, obviously, if OpTic beats them, it's not like a huge upset. The same with Toronto, even though I think Toronto would be an interesting one just in general. I think like just in general, like the Thieves are the number one team, but OpTic talent wise, it can match up somewhat with them, and I very easily could see OpTic winning those matches if FaZe can get right. Like obviously, FaZe matches up as well with a team like LAT, like anybody. Like they're just as good, just from a talent perspective, as LAT, maybe a little bit worse if you want to split hairs. But I think obviously OpTic and FaZe are the two most well equipped teams to match up with LAT. I don't know if you agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, we saw FaZe play them already, right? And like
Yeah.
I know when we talked about that match initially, like it was basically one control round away from a 3-0 for LAT, but then FaZe reverse swept the control, won the map 4 and forced a game 5. LAT clutched it out, but that showed a little bit there that like it's not like it could have been a 3-0 stomp for LAT, and that changes the conversation. But FaZe has the fight in them, and what that squad's capable of. So yeah, I think FaZe, OpTic are the easy answers. I think the way Toronto and Carolina have both played early on, like you can't discredit them in terms of facing off against LATs. Like just the teams that have won so far all their matches, that if they face off, they gotta have somewhat of a decent shot. So and then, we could have this conversation right now, and Vegas Falcons could end up being the first team to upset LA Thieves. I don't think it's incredibly likely, but that's just the nature of Call of Duty. At the end of the day, is pretty much any team can win on any given day. If you actually show up and play at your best, and you catch a team slipping, like something like that could happen. I don't foresee that happening, and I think it's going to be tough if LAT doesn't get complacent early on, which I don't think they will. But if LAT continues to have that thirst for and just that hunger for victory, then it's going to be tough for even like a bottom of the standings team to pull off one of those miraculous upsets where we both like don't
Yeah.
see it coming at all. It happens, and then we're sitting on the next episode like, I don't know how that even happened, but it did. So um so yeah, I mean, it's going to be tough, but it again, just like I said with Carolina, I do not foresee
No.
LA Thieves going undefeated the entire 2025 season. I do think they have a better shot of doing it than Carolina,
Yeah.
but I still don't see it happening. So they're going to lose eventually. It's just a question of who does it, and then once that happens, we'll be here to break it all down.
Yeah, there's just too many matches and too
Yeah,
much fluctuation in Call of Duty for these teams to go, 6 months without losing a single match. And like, if this was like a best of 9, you could see it like FaZe. Like, are they really going to lose 5 maps in a series? Like, it would be a lot more likely that they could run the table in that kind of scenario. Best of 5, it could be over and done with in an hour. And then you're like, all right, like they just had the worst hour of their entire month. It just so happened to be in this match. But you mentioned Vegas, and I think they're a great, my New Year's resolution for them was just show up and try your best. And that's what their New Year's resolution should be. It should be, okay, like we're going to give our best effort in the practices, we're going to give our best effort in the matches, and whatever happens, happens. We're not expecting to win. We're not expecting wins to just happen, but that's how it's going to happen. It's going to be that another team plays down to the level of Vegas or what they believe Vegas is, and they don't play up to their capability. And then Vegas is like, all right, like we know we can beat a team that isn't trying as hard or is just disjointed in a way. And that's what we were talking about when we, discussed Atlanta possibly losing to Vegas. Atlanta is obviously a much, much more talented team, but when Atlanta is at its worst and they can't seem to buy maps, they can't seem to win any of their matches, like it's realistic to think that Vegas can win. What did you have down for Vegas?
yeah, I think it's you know shit for any of our listeners who've heard us or me in particular talk about Vegas this year. It's really just about getting more reps and more experience, and just the matches. Again, they have to look at it as their chance to play against the best players in the world, or the best players they've ever really had a chance to play against, just because they haven't had that experience of competing against these North American players outside of like the World Cup last year and some like random 1v1s that people were talking about, like King of Body throwing up large amounts of money to do on 100 plus ping. Um, all yeah, so end of the day, like it's going to be a struggle for the squad. Most people expected that, and they just gotta continue to work and develop, and they can't get discouraged with the losses, because you can see a team like Gentlemates, I guess, that they're winless right now, and that's a little bit more unexpected than Vegas being winless at this point. And a team like Gentlemates, who has former world championships on or world champions on it, they can get discouraged, but you can't, as the Vegas Falcons, you can't get discouraged and let that affect your performance or your ability to learn and develop as a COD player. Like it feels like we've had these conversations before with other teams, let alone players coming from a different country and all that stuff, where we've talked about like development and rebuilds and stuff like that. There really isn't that in Call of Duty in this current stage. There's no minor league system. There's no draft where you can tank for the number one pick. And even if you're trying to tank like the Giants and you end up winning and then losing your shot at the number one pick, that there's nothing like that for Falcons to lose and gain from losing. What they can gain from losing is uh the knowledge and the experience of these matches and develop and take it with a grain of salt that yeah, we're losing, but we're getting the chance to play against the best and we can only get better from here.
Yeah, and you mentioned LAG, so I figure we talk about them. My New Year's resolution is to stay the course. There shouldn't be panic. I agree with you. Like, they are certainly not a team when you start the season, you're thinking, okay, like they're not going to win, until after the new year. I don't think anyone really expected that, but that's where they are right now. But you can take like the moral victory and say, well, look at our schedule. We played two 4-0 teams. We played OpTic. We played Minnesota in our first match. We lost in game 5, a game 5 round 11. So like we're really close. I would think if I'm in that LAG camp, I'm saying like just keep doing what you're doing. Like, you're going to improve as a team, but you can't get discouraged. You can't think, well, like, man, we're 0-4, like it's over. It's very early in the season. Yeah, you're probably going to start in the losers bracket for Major 1. We'll see. Like, if you make a run in the minor, it's not going to be that
Yeah.
way. So like, you have a lot of time. You have these opportunities to right the ship, even for Major 1. So I would just tell those guys, hey, we're good. Like, it's really not that big of a deal. Like, it's not ideal or anything, but like, our schedule will definitely get easier from here. Like, we're not going to keep playing OpTic, LAT, Carolina week over week over week. So that would be my advice and my New Year's resolutions for them. What did you have for LA Guerrillas M8?
Yeah, I'm still refusing to refer to them as that. So I guess maybe a more a joking resolutions is to figure out a legal way to get rid of the LAG part of their name and just officially make the transition to Gentlemates. But um, all kidding aside, I think yeah, like just getting that first win and getting over the hump to get that win is going to be the most important thing, and how they build on that whenever it eventually happens will be important for this squad. They have the potential and the pedigree there of former world champions. We've talked at length now about Lynn's quote unquote stepping in the shoes of Hydra on that 2023 NYSL squad. Um, I've been encouraged from what I've seen from Lynn so far. I think the overall thing is like it's going to be hard for anyone to replicate MVP Hydra's form, let alone Lynn's in year 2 of his CDL career. But I have been encouraged with what I've seen in the small sample size so far from him. Um, so I feel like just the New Year's resolutions is kind of like getting that first win, seeing what those guys who know how to win, how they can pass that along to Lens, and maybe that's the key is just continue to work on the chemistry there with the new guy, and if, if Kismet and Lens can get on the same page and get even close to what Kismet and Hydra were doing during that championship run together, like that could be a recipe for success for them. So um whatever work they got to do to try and make that happen, that's my resolution for them.
A team that we weren't expecting to be near the bottom. We have to talk about them, Atlanta FaZe. They are, they've been one of, if not the most disappointing teams so far to this point in the season. Obviously, very early on, so things could change dramatically in a few weeks. By the time we even get after the minor, like they could have really showed a lot and showed that they've improved a lot. I would just say like for them, they just have to remember who they are. Like, they're not one of
Yeah.
these teams that should be near the bottom or even in the middle of the pack. Like, each of these players, even if they haven't done it together necessarily for like the world championship or anything, they've won the World Cup together. They have individually won world championships. They have, together won, a tournament. They've, beaten OpTic. They beat OpTic so many times last season, and OpTic ended up winning the CDL championship. So like, just remember that you're Atlanta FaZe, that you are, four of the very most talented players in the world and start playing like it on a consistent basis. That would be my advice. That would be my New Year's resolutions for them. Did you have something similar for Atlanta FaZe?
Yeah, I really like what you just said there. I think for me, it's kind of just like turn the page on these first couple matches and hit the reset button for a fresh start in 2025. Like you have this winter break going on, and you have the opportunity. I don't want to say like just forget everything you've done so far in the game. Like I feel like they don't have to go back to square one, but I feel like just like what's happened so far early this year. They know who they are as players. They know what they can accomplish together. Just hit that little bit of a reset here with the holidays and whatnot, and come back firing on all cylinders. I don't have it in front of me, but I remember when we were going over their like 0-2 start. They have a pretty uh winnable schedule for their last
Mm-hmm.
few qualifier matches. So we'll have to see how they do in the minor. But yeah, I still expect this squad to regain a little bit, and yeah, I think finding their consistency as a unit will be what they want to achieve in 2025.
What did you have as your New Year's resolution for C9? Because I believe we had the exact same one as each other.
I put better ping to the Texas server. I mean that's like if they put something on their Christmas list for Santa, like feels like that had to be at the very top of it. Um, Even if that might be joking a little bit, I bet Attach and them wouldn't complain if that actually came to fruition. Um, but it's just like we just need to see more of what this squad is capable of. We had that first week where it didn't go well for them, and we heard about the server issues. Then the second week it went a little bit better. They win a match, and then they lost to Carolina, right? Was it a reverse sweep
Yeah, that was the only
or
reverse sweep.
yeah. So like they didn't go 2-0, but they definitely were more competitive in the second week. And
Mm-hmm.
I forget who they played in the first. Was it Vegas? They played in their first match.
Of the second week,
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah, something like
Um.
that. I know that they didn't have like a necessarily
No,
the hardest schedule on week
I
2.
thought it was a team that
Was it
I thought
LAG?
it was like maybe it was a team like I thought we knew like they weren't in Texas, but I think Vegas is in Texas.
So they beat
Um,
Minnesota. Yeah, so they
Minnesota.
lost to
Okay, so
LAT and
we were
OpTic, and
saying
then
yeah,
played
because I
Minnesota
remember we
Carolina.
were both like we don't know for sure if Minnesota's competing from that old ROKKR facility in Minnesota. We don't know for sure if Carolina's competing in Carolina, even though it seems like they are because of like that little teaser video they made or whatever. Um, but it seems like they weren't playing against teams potentially on a Texas server, or they just had better connection for the second week of matches. And um, all jokes aside, yeah, I just want to see more of the squad, and I want to see um, more sample size of them potentially um, I don't know best way to word it, but like just a larger sample size of matches where it's like
Mm-hmm.
we know where they're playing against and we know if there's going to be potential server issues or if we know like they're just getting smoked or they are just smoking other teams and we don't have to worry about the ping issue and all that can go away if they show up on land and do have a good performance there. So I just want to see more of the squad in general and jokes aside about the server issues, but like I said, I don't think those guys would complain if they got a fix for that Denver server or whatever was going on there.
Yeah, I think maybe a realistic resolution, and it's still related to the internet stuff, is like try not to get as tilted about it as you have been, because I don't think it's going to help anything if you're just like going into the matches, you're like, screw this, man. Like, we're so screwed because we got this team in Texas or whatever. Like, I just, obviously it's easier said than done. I'm sure when you tell someone to calm down and they don't calm down, like you can get a little frustrated about that. But that's just where I'm coming from. I would also, in a somewhat serious manner, start laying the groundwork for reuniting with Pred. They seem like a
Yeah.
really realistic
Yep.
option for him, and he has the most history with that team or like a lot of those players. Um, I don't know, like it just seems like the most likely would be him going to C9, or if FaZe, I guess, just continues to lose, then that would be also a very likely thing. But that we'll see. Like, I think it's an interesting possibility.
Definitely.
Let's talk about Pred's former team real quick, the Surge. I don't know, like, I didn't really have anything for them because they're a young team. They're relatively inexperienced. They just kind of need to grow together. Like, just and I would. It's kind of the same thing as LAG. Obviously, they're not in the same exact scenario, but I would just say, like, stay the course, keep working together. Listen to Rambo and his incredible accent. Like, just I don't know, like, let it go. Like, there's no reason to panic at this point. This is more of a long-term team anyway. Like, maybe it won't work out, but I tend to think like they have a lot of talent here, and a lot of talent that has played like a season in the CDL, or like maybe a season and a half. That's really not a lot when you're comparing it to the top level teams. So if
Yeah.
they can find some consistency and stay in the middle of the pack, and then as gradually just increase their level of play, I think that's what they should be looking for.
Yeah, I didn't have much for them either. I put down like get some game five ice, but even in saying that, they do have a game five win and they're 1-2 in game five. So it's not like Boston last year where they just weren't winning game fives and a very small sample size early on. But yeah, I think end of the day, like we talked about um at length in other episodes, we talked about just Abuza in general joining the squad, entering the league in a role that he clearly wasn't fit for him and just wasn't his natural play style. And then towards the end of the year, getting on that main AR role and that kind of unlocking his form. So this is really his first full season on that full time AR role, and just continuing to develop and learn from Rambo, like you said, and um, I mean, it's not necessarily the biggest one for one comparison with Vegas, but like you said, like a lot of these guys, even '04 has half a year of CDL experience, if that. Abuza has 1 full year. Hixie has half a year. I don't think he played anymore before that time on Toronto. No, and Nasty has a full year. Maybe had Nasty has like
Year and a half or so.
2 3/4 of a year or something like
Yeah.
that. So regardless of the specifics, it's like you said, a very young team and in terms of just CDL experience. So getting more reps in, learning from a great COD mind like Rambo and applying what you guys do in practice and whatnot. This team could be a squad that if they get down the fundamentals and get a good system going, which is what you expect from a team coached by Rambo, this is a team that could be causing some upsets later on in the season.
Yeah, a team like you mentioned, the Game Five ice thing. I think that's a real thing with Miami. They're 0-3 in Game Fives, and they're 1-3 on the season. And I don't see anything from them in general that I'm like, man, this is like really lacking or anything, because Real and ROKKR have been pretty good. And like the way that a lot of these teams win games is they have two players that are like their main slayers, and then they have two supporting guys that are able to, like you like to say, do the dirty work. And like there has to be some kind of give or take there. And it seems like Miami has that, but it's fallen apart obviously in game fives. So maybe just improving in S&D and getting to a more consistent level. Like even if you're winning 40 to 50% of your S&Ds, like, I mean, if you're going to game five all the time, then that's just getting half of those wins that you weren't getting in the first place. So that's what I would go with Miami. What did you have?
So I wrote down get some consistent help for Super Saiyan Real, and I think I can take that even a step further and just say like find a way. Like yeah, it's cool to have Real be that pop off guy and drop a 1.5 KD, and that's awesome, but you can't consistently rely on that level of production. So at the same time as you maybe for Miami fans want to find, a way to consistently unlock that form of Real, you also at the same time want to find a way to get the wins when Real isn't playing up to that Super Saiyan Real form. Um, so yeah, I think again, small sample size for this squad, But I have been encouraged. I mean, even going back to last year, just when Real joined the team, it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows at first. There were some growing pains, but by the end of the year, they really started to hit a new level, and it felt like they had something there, and they just got to continue to build on that. And adding another new player in ROKKR could like be a temporary speed bump there, where they got to another rookie player here, they got to get him up to speed and get him into the system and whatnot. But this is a squad, again, kind of similar headspace. I my thinking of them is similar to Vancouver, in the sense of like, this is a squad, if they continue to play like we literally saw last year, the Miami squad, as they played, they got better towards the end of the year. So same thing could happen here, and they could be causing some upsets towards the end of the year. But yeah, I think uh, if Real continues to develop into like the star of this team, that's really good for them. And finding a way to consistently have him performing like that is great. At the same time, though, finding a way to get those victories and maybe like squeak out a game 5 dub or something like that when he isn't having his best series, that's as equally important for Miami's potential success in 2025.
Another team, like I think it's kind of the same, but they don't have this player, like they don't have the Real, is Minnesota. So far this season, they just haven't had that player that's popped off and been able to carry them to some of those wins or get them close enough. Like obviously they started off really well. They win those first 2 game 5s, and then they get into the second week. They have a really tough schedule. They lose to C9. They lose to LAT. And no one has like really just risen above the rest. I think obviously Nero would probably be, if you're looking for that player, you say like he's played the best. But I think when they put this roster together, they were thinking that any of those three, Estrio, Gio, or Nero, could pop off and be that top guy for them. And Estrio and Gio just haven't been at that level to this point. Paul, I think, has played pretty well, especially because he's been out of the CDL for a little bit. So, what are you looking for from Minnesota in 2025?
Yeah, this was actually the toughest one for me. I didn't really know what I wanted to put down here, but I did say finding a way to unlock that consistent slaying from Geo and Nero. I feel like I've talked about that at length now, so I don't really want to use that just as my uh, resolution. But I will go back to something else we talked about, where Paul X was talking in one of those initial post game interviews about like his playing time with Crim6 and like learning from him and taking in that information on how to be a leader and whatnot. I feel like that hasn't really been talked about enough, and maybe that's like the direction we can go for the resolution, is just like Paul X becoming that leader. Because again, he's always been the guy over these past couple of years that he's like thrown in the middle of the season and hopes for a miracle to happen, right? Like this is his real first shot starting a season in the CDL, where he doesn't have to come into another situation. Like he gets to set the tone here on this team and be there from the start and develop with these players and whatnot. And if like he was really able to learn from Crim6 and in the leadership department, like maybe that can be his identity, and that can be what allows him to stay in the CDL long term, because that's something that's super valuable in my eyes, at least. Like other people want to downplay like the importance of an IGL and whatnot, but like not every team can just have 4 superstar slayers, right? And especially a team like Minnesota here, one of those questions heading into the year was who was going to be that leader, because it really felt like just 4 young guys. Or like Nero is the most tenured veteran on the squad, and he's at like year 3, I think, now in the CDL. Obviously they got Looney as a coach. I think very highly of him, and I think he's a good fit coaching wise for a young squad like this. But um, I'm gonna say, as much as I want to see like that slaying from Geo and Nero on a consistent basis really take that next step as star slayers potentially, my other resolution is going to see the continued development of Paul X and what that's going to look like what, because I feel like he does have the potential to be a pop-off player, but he's not that player that I expect to just go into a map and drop 40 and a hard point consistently. So like if he can have that identity and kind of to build on that leadership quality that we've heard just a very brief amount, like maybe that's, the next level for him. And at the same time, maybe this is all just fugazi and it doesn't really matter, but that's where my head's at right now for Minnesota.
Last but not least, we have the Boston Breach. I think just literally stay what you're doing. Like whatever you're doing is working, and it's perfect. There's nothing more that you should be doing. Like, who cares if you lose one game 5? If you're winning 3, you're doing something right.
There you go.
I was thinking like they're in Boston, so maybe there's some 3-leaf clovers floating around the office, or I don't know. Like there's got to be something that like because they lost all those game 5s last season. Now they're winning the game 5s. Just literally like just the most serious thing I could say is don't get discouraged when the schedule picks up and like you start playing LAT, maybe FaZe, Toronto, Carolina on a consistent basis, and maybe you start dropping a few of those matches consistently. Like just you're okay. Like you're Boston. It's not a world championship or bust kind of team. You're just trying to win as many matches as you can, and to this point they've done that perfectly.
I mean, you just gotta like. I'm pretty sure we had this conversation after the Boston's win over OpTic. It's like when it's literally 1 versus 12 in the standings, like they had absolutely nothing to lose, and maybe that was the key for them. They just played free COD because it's like everyone is literally expecting us to lose this match. So what do we have to lose? We'd go out there, do our thing, try our best. At the end of the day, we might lose, but that's what everyone's expecting. So, that's been a conversation for other teams in the past. Like I know like 16 seeds and March Madness and stuff for college basketball. Like I feel like that's been like the who was it it wasn't California, but whatever the team with that Jack Golke guy last year that beat Kentucky.
Oakland.
Oakland, yeah, thank you. Like that guy was like straight up like, yeah, I'm not gonna be in the NBA, but I actually did see. I think he signed like a G League contract or something like that.
Yeah,
but,
with the Bucks.
Yeah, getting off topic, but like teams like that, they go in with that mindset like everyone is literally expecting us to lose, so we got nothing to lose.
Yeah.
And maybe that really is a real thing where you can just play carefree and it lets you go to that next level and it helps in the long run. So yeah, I think overall for Boston, they just got to, whatever they did against OpTic, they just got to do what they can to replicate that. At the end of the day, there could have been some stuff going on behind the scenes with OpTic, obviously with the Pred situation, that maybe how much that played a factor in Boston getting the win. I, again, don't want to discredit Boston, but that has to at least be mentioned in my eyes. But yeah, overall for them, I think doing what they can to hit that consistent form that we saw them display in the OpTic match is going to be key for them. And I think just overall Snoopy, like continued development for him. If he's able to continue building up on what we've seen so far this year, he could be in for a big year. And that's got to be exciting for some Snoopy believers out there.
I am one of them, so I am encouraged. But yeah, that does it for the CDL teams New Year's resolutions. I know this has been a little bit of a longer episode, but I think we do a pretty good job of like at least talking about every CDL team. Like I think we could just cop out and do like the top 4 or 5 and like all right, like we're done. But I mean, we gave a little bit on each of these teams. Obviously, let's see how it works out for each of them going into 2025. They'll have the minor coming up as kind of like the first test, and especially with Hacienda coming into the map set, that's going to be a huge like kind of peek into what competitive will look like in the new year at least. So we'll see what happens with that. Obviously, we don't have any more time, but I think on the next episode, we're going to talk more in general about the Call of Duty League and like, what we want to see from the CDL or maybe just COD esports in general in 2025, maybe that we didn't see in 2024. If we're talking as much as we did for this episode, on the next episode, expect another long one. And then we should, starting next weekend, start, getting back into actual CDL matches. Obviously, the minor kicks off on January 10th. So we got about a week and a half to go until that. Yeah, that about does it for me. Happy New Year. We will not see you until New Year's Day or a little bit after that. And so Happy New Year to everybody. Happy holidays in general. Make sure to subscribe or follow or like the podcast feed wherever you're listening or watching on. I did see, I think we're at 178 YouTube subscribers before the stream. And I looked, and we starting like December 1st of 2024, we were at 150. So we had gained 28 subscribers in a month. So we basically averaging one subscriber a day, which is awesome to see. A lot of views on some of the recent episodes. If you have any ideas or any suggestions on what content you would like to see from the channel, please let me know. You can tweet at me at Pres Byers. You can tweet at Bink at GABink or at JBink with 2Ks. And then the Ego Chall Podcast is at Ego Chall Podcast. Yeah, we'll be back on Wednesday. Wednesday, January 1st. Podcast will go on your feeds Thursday, January 2nd. Yeah, that does it for me. Bink, take it away.
Yeah, thank you guys as always for all the support. Happy holidays and happy New Year, like Preston said. It's exciting. We, definitely talked a little bit more than we might have thought today, but we had a bunch to talk about, and we got even more lined up for you on the next show. And we really we've been kind of tiptoeing around it. We really haven't dove into the minor that much, so it's coming, and we got a lot to talk about with that. So, gonna be exciting. Can't wait for to just hit 2025 and go full swing here and keep building off the success we've seen so far at the end of 2024 here with the Ego Chall Podcast. So thank you guys as always. Really appreciate it. Appreciate all you guys in the YouTube comments there. Hawk John, Spats Burner, and Sauce 7412. Yeah, but yeah, we'll see you when we see you again. Thank you guys as always, and remember to send the chow.